The warning signals came too late. By the time Admiral Sarah Chen reached the command center of the Mars Orbital Station, Earth's sky was already burning. She watched through the massive viewing screen as beams of brilliant light descended from the darkness of space, each one carrying death to the cities below. New York vanished in a flash of white fire. Tokyo followed seconds later. Then Beijing, London, and Moscow. One by one, humanity's greatest cities were erased from existence. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the console until her knuckles turned white. Around her, officers shouted reports and warnings, but their voices seemed distant and hollow. She had spent 20 years in the space fleet, defending humanity from pirates and asteroids. Nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing could prepare anyone for this. The enemy ships hung in orbit like dark angels of death. They were massive, each one larger than any vessel humanity had ever built. Their hulls were black and smooth, reflecting no light. These were the Zarkun, and they had come without warning, without communication, without mercy. They simply appeared in Earth's orbit and began their work of destruction. A young communications officer turned to Sarah, tears streaming down his face. He held out a datapad with shaking hands. The numbers on the screen made her stomach twist. 4.2 billion dead. In just 48 hours, the Zarkun had killed nearly half of Earth's population. The two newest human colonies, small settlements on distant worlds, had been destroyed completely. Only New Hope Colony remained, too far away and too small for the aliens to bother with yet. Sarah forced herself to breathe. She had to think clearly. Panic would kill them all. She looked around the command center at the surviving officers. They were looking at her, waiting for orders, waiting for hope. But what hope could she give them? The human fleet consisted of 47 ships. The Zarkun had thousands. Humanity had been in space for only 200 years. According to the brief data they had gathered before the attack, the Zarkun Empire had existed for 50,000 years. Dr. Marcus Webb entered the command center, his laboratory coat covered in dust. The xenobiologist had been studying alien artifacts when the attack began. He approached Sarah with a grim expression. He had been analyzing the attack patterns, trying to understand why the Zarkun had struck so suddenly and so brutally. Marcus showed her his findings on a portable screen. The Zarkun had sent a message, but it came after the attack started. The message was simple and cold. Humanity had expanded into territory the Zarkun considered theirs. The attack was meant as a lesson, a warning to other primitive species that the hegemony would not tolerate upstarts. The Zarkun expected humanity to surrender immediately or be wiped out completely. Sarah read the message 3 times. Each time her anger grew stronger. The Zarkun thought humans were primitive. They thought this attack would break humanity's spirit. They thought wrong. She looked at the devastated Earth below and made a decision. Humanity would not surrender. They would not beg for mercy. They would fight, and they would make the Zarkun regret every human life they had taken. She called together the surviving military and political leaders through encrypted channels. They met virtually from hidden bunkers scattered across Earth and the remaining colony. The president spoke first, his face haggard and aged by grief. He asked the question everyone was thinking. How could humanity possibly fight back against such overwhelming power? Sarah stood before the virtual assembly and spoke with conviction. The Zarkun were powerful, yes, but they had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that destroying Earth's cities would destroy humanity's ability to fight back. They were wrong. When humanity built its internet and communication systems, they built them to survive. Every piece of scientific knowledge, every military plan, every technical blueprint was stored in thousands of locations. The data centers deep underground had survived. The backup systems on stations and colonies remained intact. Marcus added his own observation. The Zarkun had attacked with overwhelming force, but their tactics showed arrogance. They flew in predictable patterns. They used the same weapon frequencies. They expected no real resistance. This arrogance was a weakness that humanity could exploit. The Zarkun had never fought an enemy that refused to follow the rules of honorable warfare. They had never faced an enemy that would do anything to survive. The council voted unanimously. They would activate what they called the Reaping Protocol. Every surviving human would become part of the war effort. Every factory, every laboratory, every resource would be dedicated to one goal: revenge. Not just revenge, but survival. They would show the Zarkun and the entire galaxy that humanity could not be easily destroyed. Sarah took command of the remnant fleet. 47 ships against thousands seemed impossible, but she remembered something her grandfather told her when she was young. He had been a soldier in one of Earth's old wars. He said that the most dangerous enemy is not the strongest or the smartest. The most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As Earth continued to burn below, Sarah began planning humanity's response. The Zarkun had struck first. They had killed billions. They thought they had won, but the war had only just begun. In the hidden factories beneath Earth's surface in the secret shipyards of New Hope Colony, humanity was preparing to teach the ancient empire a lesson of their own. They would learn that humans were not primitive. They were not weak, and they would never, ever surrender. The war shepherd Krelvan watched Earth from his command ship. The mission had been simple. Eliminate the human threat and move on. But something troubled him. Most species surrendered after losing half their population. Most species begged for mercy. But the humans were silent. Their remaining ships did not flee. They did not call for peace. They simply waited, and somehow that silence was more disturbing than any threat could have been. 3 months after the attack, humanity was transformed. The survivors who emerged from the bunkers and shelters found a world that looked nothing like the Earth they remembered. But they did not mourn. They did not hesitate. They worked. Every single day, every single hour, they worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in one of the underground factory complexes beneath what used to be Germany. The facility stretched for kilometers in every direction, carved deep into the rock during the early days of space colonization. Thousands of workers moved through the space like ants in a hive. The sound of machinery was constant, a rhythmic pounding that never stopped. Day and night meant nothing here. The factory ran continuously, producing weapons, ships, and ammunition. Dr. Marcus Webb walked beside her, pointing out different sections. Here they were building new hull plating using materials salvaged from destroyed cities. There they were assembling missile systems based on captured Zarkun technology. Every station was busy, every worker focused. These people had lost families, homes, entire cities, but they channeled their grief into action. They built weapons to strike back at the enemy who had taken everything from them. Marcus showed Sarah his latest discovery. His team had been studying the wreckage of a Zarkun fighter that crashed during the initial attack. What they found surprised everyone. The Zarkun technology was advanced, but it was also predictable. The aliens built their ships and weapons the same way they had for thousands of years. They saw no reason to change or innovate. Why would they? Their technology had always been superior to everyone else in the galaxy. But humanity was different. Humans changed constantly. They adapted. They improved. They took old ideas and made them new. Marcus and his team had reverse-engineered the Zarkun shield technology in just 6 weeks. A process that should have taken years, maybe decades, was completed in less than 2 months. They did it by breaking every rule of traditional scientific research. They worked in parallel teams, sharing data instantly across the globe. They tried hundreds of approaches simultaneously. They failed fast and learned faster. Sarah listened to Marcus explain how they had improved the Zarkun shields. The original design was good, but humans made it better. They increased the power output by 30%. They reduced the energy consumption by half. The Zarkun would be facing their own technology, upgraded and enhanced by human innovation. Marcus smiled as he said it, but there was no joy in that smile. Only cold determination. In another part of the complex, Captain James Okafor was training soldiers for a new kind of warfare. Before the attack, James had been part of Earth's special forces. He had fought in conflicts across the solar system, dealing with pirates and terrorists. Now he was teaching these skills to thousands of volunteers, but he was not teaching them to fight fair. He was teaching them to fight dirty. James demonstrated tactics that would never appear in any official military manual. How to sabotage enemy ships from the inside, how to use the environment as a weapon, how to turn enemy technology against them, how to make every engagement cost the Zarkun more than they expected to pay. His students were eager learners. They understood that honor and fairness were luxuries humanity could no longer afford. Sarah watched a training exercise where human soldiers practiced boarding actions. They moved fast and struck hard, using every advantage they could find. They booby-trapped corridors. They hacked enemy systems. They created chaos and confusion. The Zarkun, Marcus explained, fought according to ancient codes of honor. They announced their presence. They fought in formation. They gave their enemies chances to surrender. Humans would give them no such courtesy. The transformation was not just military. On New Hope Colony, the surviving settlers had converted their entire settlement into a fortress and shipyard. The colony had been small, home to only 50,000 people. Now it was the center of humanity's military production. Every building served the war effort. Children too young to work in factories attended schools where they learned engineering, tactics, and alien languages. Everyone contributed. Everyone understood what was at stake. Sarah received regular reports from New Hope. The shipyards were producing vessels at an incredible rate. These were not the elegant exploration ships that humanity had built before the war. These were weapons, fast, deadly, and designed for one purpose. The designers had studied every engagement humanity ever fought and learned from it. They stripped away everything unnecessary. No comfortable quarters, no fancy viewing lounges. Just engines, weapons, shields, and crew quarters barely large enough to survive in. Marcus briefed the War Council on his analysis of Zarkun warfare. The ancient empire had fought hundreds of wars across thousands of years, but they always fought the same way. They assembled their fleets. They approached in formation. They engaged in direct combat. They valued honor and tradition above all else. This made them predictable, and predictability was a fatal weakness against an enemy who refused to play by the rules. Sarah proposed humanity's first counterattack, not a direct assault on Zarkun military forces. That would be suicide. Instead, she wanted to target their economy. The Zarkun Empire was vast, spanning hundreds of star systems. That empire required resources, mining operations, trade routes, supply lines. These were spread thin across space, often protected by minimal forces. They were vulnerable. The Council approved her plan unanimously. Humanity would strike where the Zarkun least expected it. They would attack the mining colonies and resource extraction facilities. They would disrupt trade routes. They would force the Zarkun to spread their forces thin, trying to protect everything. And every resource humanity denied the Zarkun was one less resource they could use to build more weapons, more ships, more tools of destruction. James Okafor volunteered to lead the first mission. He would take a small fleet of newly built human ships, equipped with the upgraded Zarkun technology and human tactical thinking. His target was a mining operation in a system the Zarkun called Core 7. Intelligence suggested it was lightly defended, producing metals essential for their ship construction. Destroying it would hurt their war production. As James prepared for departure, Sarah gave him one final order. Make sure the Zarkun know who attacked them. Make sure they understand that humanity was not dead, not defeated, not afraid. The Admiral wanted the Zarkun to feel what humanity had felt: fear, uncertainty, the knowledge that death could come at any moment from any direction. The human fleet launched from New Hope Colony under cover of darkness. 47 ships had become 90 ships in just 3 months, small compared to the Zarkun armada but growing. Each ship carried weapons that combined alien technology with human innovation. Each crew had been trained in tactics the Zarkun would never expect. They jumped into hyperspace, heading toward their first target. On Earth, in the bunkers and underground cities, billions of humans waited for news. They had survived the worst attack in human history. They had buried their dead and dried their tears. Now they worked, building the tools of revenge. The Zarkun had thought the war was over. They thought humanity would surrender or die. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war had only begun and humanity was done playing the victim. It was time to show the galaxy what humans could do when pushed to the edge of extinction. Captain James Okafor's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Core 7 system. His tactical display showed exactly what intelligence had promised. 1 mining station orbiting a dead planet, 3 cargo vessels loading refined metals, 2 Zarkun patrol ships, outdated models that had been in service for centuries. The enemy was completely unprepared for what was about to happen. James gave the signal. His ships accelerated toward the mining station, moving in patterns that confused the Zarkun sensors. They did not approach in formation. They did not announce their presence. They simply attacked. Missiles launched from multiple angles. Energy weapons targeted the station's power core and communication arrays. Within minutes, the mining station was crippled, unable to call for help or defend itself. The Zarkun patrol ships moved to intercept, but they were too slow. Human ships were smaller and faster. They darted around the lumbering alien vessels, striking at weak points that Marcus Webb's team had identified. The Zarkun shields flickered and failed under the coordinated assault. One patrol ship exploded. The other tried to retreat but ran into a minefield that human ships had deployed during their approach. It was destroyed seconds later. James ordered his ships to board the mining station. Human soldiers flooded through the corridors, moving fast and striking hard. The Zarkun workers inside expected the attackers to follow rules of warfare. They expected warnings and chances to surrender. Instead, they found humans who fought with ruthless efficiency. Every corridor was a trap, every room a potential ambush. The Zarkun had never experienced this kind of warfare before. The cargo vessels tried to escape, but human ships disabled their engines with precise shots. James did not destroy them. Instead, he let them drift in space, their crews alive but helpless. He wanted survivors to spread the word. He wanted the galaxy to know that humanity was fighting back. Before leaving, he programmed a message into the station's emergency beacon. A simple message in the common galactic language. Humanity remembers. Humanity retaliates. Over the next 6 months, similar attacks happened across Zarkun territory. Mining colonies fell silent. Trade convoys disappeared. Supply depots were raided and destroyed. Each attack was swift and brutal. The humans struck without warning, from unexpected directions, using tactics that seemed to have no honor or logic. They poisoned water supplies. They hacked automated systems and turned them against their creators. They planted bombs that detonated days after they left, spreading fear and paranoia. War Shepherd Krelvan stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no sense. His empire was being attacked by an enemy that should have been destroyed months ago. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be weak. Yet they fought like demons, striking everywhere and nowhere. Impossible to predict or counter. His officers reported losses that seemed impossible. 30% of resource income gone in just half a year. Krelvan studied the human tactics with growing unease. They did not fight honorably. They ambushed supply convoys. They attacked civilian mining operations. They used biological weapons that targeted Zarkun physiology specifically. Dr. Webb's team had developed viruses that made the aliens sick, but did not kill them immediately. Infected Zarkun would spread the disease to others before symptoms appeared. Entire outposts would become useless as workers fell ill. The humans also weaponized asteroids. They would attach engines to space rocks and send them crashing into Zarkun facilities at incredible speeds. Simple, cheap, and devastatingly effective, the Zarkun defense systems were designed to stop ships and missiles, not natural objects moving at orbital velocities. Mining stations, fuel depots, even military bases were destroyed by rocks that cost humanity almost nothing to deploy. Admiral Sarah Chen monitored the campaign from her command ship. Every report brought good news. The humans were winning battles they had no business winning. Not through superior technology or numbers, but through creativity and determination. Her crews were exhausted, pushed to their limits, but they never complained. They had all lost someone in the first attack. They all had personal reasons to fight. Dr. Marcus Webb made first contact with another species during one of these raids. The Cathara were a peaceful race that the Zarkun had conquered centuries ago. They worked in the mines and factories producing weapons and materials for their masters. Marcus approached them carefully, offering help in exchange for information. The Cathara were shocked that anyone would dare oppose the hegemony, but when they saw humans fighting and winning, hope sparked in their eyes. The Cathara began providing intelligence about Zarkun movements and facilities. They sabotaged equipment when they could do so safely. They spread rumors that made the Zarkun nervous and paranoid. Marcus realized that humanity was not alone in hating the Empire. There were dozens of subject species, all oppressed, all waiting for someone to show them that resistance was possible. Humans were becoming that symbol of resistance. Sarah decided it was time to make a formal announcement. She recorded a message and broadcast it across all galactic communication channels. Every species in the galaxy would hear it. Every empire would learn what happened when you attacked humanity. She spoke calmly and clearly. The Zarkun struck first. They killed billions of innocent people. They thought humanity would surrender or die. They were wrong. Humanity was alive. Humanity was fighting, and humanity was just getting started. The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Other species watched in amazement as this young, supposedly primitive race fought back against one of the oldest and most powerful empires. Some laughed, thinking humans were fools who would soon be crushed. Others watched with interest, wondering if humanity might actually succeed. The Cathara and other oppressed species watched with growing hope. If humans could hurt the hegemony, maybe others could too. The Zarkun Emperor finally responded. He appeared on all channels, his face twisted with rage. He declared that humanity would be exterminated completely. Every human ship, every trace of human civilization would be wiped from existence. He sent orders to his war shepherds. Find Earth, find the human colonies. Destroy them all. Show no mercy. Leave nothing alive, but the Emperor's rage only strengthened human resolve. Sarah listened to his threats and smiled coldly. The Zarkun still did not understand. They still thought this was a conventional war that could be won through force. They did not realize that humans had nothing left to lose. Earth was already devastated. Billions were already dead. The Zarkun threats meant nothing because they had already done their worst. Now it was humanity's turn. Captain Okafor received reports that 3 other subject species had begun their own rebellions. Inspired by human actions, they were striking at Zarkun facilities in their own territories. The Empire was spreading its forces thin, trying to protect everything and everyone. The war shepherds who had once moved with confidence now hesitated, wondering where the next attack would come from. Krelvin felt something he had never experienced in his long military career. Fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but fear of the unknown, fear of an enemy that could not be predicted or understood. The humans fought without honor. They fought without mercy. They fought like cornered animals with nothing to lose. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. As the first year of the war ended, the balance of power had shifted. The Zarkun still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. But they had lost their confidence. They had lost their sense of invincibility. Most importantly, they had lost control of the narrative. The galaxy was watching, and what they saw was a young species that refused to die, a species that fought back against impossible odds, a species that might actually win. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven one critical thing. They could be hurt, but they could not be broken. The silence in the arena was absolute. 100 million beings held their breath. Elena stood at the microphone, smiling. She looked completely relaxed, like she was talking to friends in her living room. So a Vorkesh, a crystalline, and a human walk into a bar, Elena said. The bartender looks at the Vorkesh and says, "We serve your kind here." The bartender looks at the crystalline and says, "We serve your kind here too." Then the bartender looks at the human and says, "We serve food as well." Elena paused. The audience was confused. Was this mockery? Was she insulting herself? What was happening? Because humans have to eat all the time, Elena explained with a grin. Seriously, it is embarrassing. You folks can go weeks without food. We get cranky after 4 hours. My species has conquered space travel, but we still cannot make it through a meeting without a snack break. Something happened then. From somewhere in the vast audience, a sound emerged. It was small at first, a strange chirping noise from a bird-like species, then a rumbling from a species that looked like living stone, then more sounds. Different sounds, but all expressing the same thing. Laughter, not the cruel laughter from the council chambers, not mockery. This was different. This was joy. The aliens were discovering something they had never experienced before. The pleasure of laughing not at someone else's weakness, but at the shared absurdity of existence itself. Elena continued. They told us humans are weak. And you know what? They are absolutely right. I stubbed my toe yesterday and I thought I was dying. I actually considered going to the medical bay for a stubbed toe. Meanwhile, I watched a Vorkesh get hit by a cargo container and he just flexed his shoulder and walked it off. More laughter. Louder now. The Vorkesh in the audience were making deep rumbling sounds. They were laughing too. And do not even get me started on our lifespan, Elena said. 100 years, that is it. Some of you live for thousands of years. You probably spend more time choosing what to eat for breakfast than we spend in our entire adult lives. I met a being yesterday who was celebrating their 3,000th birthday. 3,000 years old. I asked them what advice they had for someone my age. They said, "You are how old, 40? Oh, honey, you are practically dead already." The arena was filling with sound now. Different species making different noises, but all of them laughing. Really laughing. Emperor Zixtherin himself was in the royal box. And even he was making a sound that might have been the Vorkesh equivalent of a chuckle. Marcus Chen came onto the stage next. He brought a guitar, an instrument from Earth. He sat on a stool and started playing. Then he sang. The song was about being human in a galaxy of superior species. The lyrics made fun of humanity's weaknesses, but in a way that was warm and self-aware. I need oxygen to breathe and water every day. I cannot see in ultraviolet. My bones are made of clay. But I can laugh at myself, and that is okay. The audience was swaying now. Some species did not have bodies that could sway, but they were trying. The concept of musical comedy was completely new to them. They had music. They had mockery. But music that made fun of the singer himself? That was revolutionary. Zara Okonkwo came out next. She did physical comedy, something the aliens had never seen. She pretended to be a human trying to use alien technology. She pushed buttons that did not exist. She pulled levers that were not there. She acted out the confusion and frustration of being in a world not built for her species. The aliens understood physical humor. They could see the absurdity. They could feel the shared experience of things not working the way they should. Zara fell down. She got back up. She tried again. She failed again. And every time she failed, she smiled and shrugged as if to say, well, that did not work. The laughter was constant now. Wave after wave of it. Species that had never made sounds of joy before were discovering new expressions. The bird-like species were chirping in complex patterns. The crystalline beings were chiming like bells. The slug-like species were making wet bubbling sounds that somehow conveyed happiness. A full comedy troupe from Earth performed sketches. They acted out scenes from human life. A family arguing about where to go for dinner. Friends trying to split a restaurant bill. A person trying to assemble furniture with confusing instructions. Simple, everyday moments that every species could relate to in their own way. The final act was a comedian who specialized in observational humor. She talked about the little absurdities of life. How socks always disappear in the laundry. How you always need to use the bathroom right after getting comfortable. How you can never find your keys when you are in a hurry. Is it just humans, or does everyone have this problem? She asked. You know you put your communication device somewhere. You remember putting it down. But when you need it, it is gone. Vanished. Like it grew legs and walked away. And you search everywhere. Under cushions. In drawers. In the refrigerator for some reason. And where do you finally find it? In your hand. You were holding it the whole time. Just me? Okay, just me then. The arena exploded with recognition. Every species had experienced something similar. The specific details were different, but the feeling was universal. The frustration, the absurdity, the eventual laughter at your own foolishness. Elena returned to the stage for the closing act. She stood there and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Some were still laughing. Some were wiping away tears or their species equivalent. Some just sat in stunned silence, processing what they had experienced. Here is what I have learned, Elena said softly. The arena grew quiet to hear her. Being weak is not the same as being worthless. Being imperfect is not the same as being broken. Every species here has weaknesses. Every being has flaws. But most of you have spent your lives hiding those flaws, pretending to be stronger than you are, maintaining hierarchies based on who can hide their weakness best. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humans learned a different way, she continued. We learned to laugh at our weaknesses, to share them, to find joy in our shared imperfection. And that laughter made us stronger, not weaker. It connected us to each other. It reminded us that we are all struggling through this crazy universe together. Elena smiled, and it was the warmest smile anyone in that arena had ever seen. So yes, we are weak. We are short-lived. We need to eat and sleep and breathe. We are not impressive by your standards, but we can laugh at ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, we can teach you to laugh at yourselves too. Because once you start laughing, once you see the absurdity and the beauty in your own imperfection, everything changes. The standing ovation started slowly. One being stood up, then another, then a whole section. Within moments, 100 million beings were on their feet, or whatever appendages they had. The sound was deafening, cheering, clapping, stomping. every species expressing approval in their own way. The grand exhibition was supposed to showcase the greatest achievements of each species. Other species had shown weapons and technology and science. Impressive things. Important things, but humanity had shown something more powerful than any weapon. They had shown joy. They had shown connection. They had shown that laughter could break down walls that had stood for 50,000 years. In the royal box, Emperor Zixtheron sat very still. His yellow eyes were wide. He was not laughing anymore. He was thinking. And what he was thinking terrified and excited him in equal measure. Humanity had just weaponized joy. And there was no defense against it. Krelthak sat in his private viewing box, his 4 hands gripping the armrest so hard that the metal bent. He had just lost his entire fortune, but that was not what bothered him. What bothered him was the sound of the audience. The sound of laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from joy, not from cruelty. It was the most dangerous sound he had ever heard. The aliens struck first, but humanity's retaliation shook the galaxy. Part 5 years after the Zarkun first strike, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The mighty hegemony that had ruled for 50,000 years was crumbling. Not from a single devastating blow, but from 1,000 small cuts. The coalition fleet, now led jointly by Admiral Sarah Chen and Cathara Commander Velshara, had captured 3 major Zarkun worlds. Each victory inspired more species to join the rebellion. The empire that had seemed eternal was falling apart. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Reaper, studying the holographic display of Zarkun space. Red dots marked territories still under hegemony control. Blue showed coalition holdings. Yellow indicated systems in active rebellion. The map was mostly blue and yellow now. Only the core systems around the Zarkun throne world remained firmly red. That throne world was humanity's ultimate target, the heart of the empire, the home of the emperor who had ordered Earth's destruction. Dr. Marcus Webb entered the bridge with urgent news. Human intelligence had obtained detailed information about the throne world's defenses from an unlikely source. War Shepherd Krelvan had contacted them again. The Zarkun commander, once humanity's greatest enemy, had become disillusioned with his empire. He had watched the emperor refuse every reasonable path to peace. He had seen the pointless deaths continue because of imperial pride. Now he was offering to help end it. Krelvan provided complete schematics of the throne world's orbital defenses, thousands of weapon platforms, hundreds of ships in the home fleet, shield generators powerful enough to withstand sustained bombardment from an entire armada. The defenses were impressive, designed to hold off any invasion force. But they had one weakness. They were designed for conventional warfare. They expected enemies to attack in formation, following the ancient codes of honorable combat. Sarah called a war council. Representatives from all coalition species gathered to plan the final assault. It would be risky. Even with Krelvan's intelligence, the throne world was heavily defended. But the opportunity was too good to pass. The Emperor had recalled most of his fleets to defend the core worlds, leaving the outer territories vulnerable. If they struck now hard and fast, they could end the war. Either in victory or in a final glorious defeat, Captain James Okafor would lead the ground assault. His special forces had trained for years for urban combat on alien worlds. They had studied Zarkun architecture, tactics, and psychology. They knew how to fight in the Imperial Palace. They knew where the Emperor would likely be. The mission was simple in concept. Fight through the palace defenses, capture the Emperor, force his surrender. Simple but incredibly dangerous. The coalition fleet assembled in deep space, far from any Zarkun sensors. Over 2,000 ships gathered. Human vessels mixed with Cathara cruisers, Dreth destroyers, and Minari support craft. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Sarah looked at the armada and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. So many species united by a common enemy. So many lives about to be risked in one final gamble. They jumped to hyperspace together, emerging at the edge of the Zarkun throne system. The home fleet detected them immediately and moved to intercept. 5,000 Zarkun ships, the pride of the Empire, formed into traditional battle formations. They looked magnificent and terrifying. Their hulls gleamed in the light of the throne world sun. This was the moment that would decide everything. Sarah gave the order to attack. The coalition fleet did not advance in formation. They split into dozens of smaller groups, each moving independently, creating chaos and confusion. The AI-controlled drone swarms launched first. Thousands of expendable craft that swarmed around the Zarkon fleet like mosquitoes. The home fleet's weapons fired constantly, destroying drones by the hundreds. But for every one destroyed, 2 more appeared to take its place. While the Zarkon focused on the drones, coalition ships struck at the orbital defenses. Human vessels specialized in close combat darted between the weapon platforms, disabling them with precise shots. Cathara ships, larger and more heavily armored, absorbed enemy fire while targeting the shield generators. The Dreth used their electronic warfare capabilities to hack enemy systems. The Minari provided medical support and rescued escape pods from damaged coalition ships. The battle raged for 18 hours. Space around the throne world became a graveyard of shattered vessels and floating debris. Coalition losses were heavy. Over 600 ships destroyed. Thousands of crew members dead or wounded. But the Zarkon suffered worse. Their home fleet, designed for impressive displays of power, could not adapt to the chaotic, unpredictable tactics of the coalition. Ship after ship fell, their crews either dying or surrendering. James Okafor's transport ships descended through the chaos, heading for the Imperial Palace. The massive structure dominated the throne world's capital city, a monument to Zarkon power and pride. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, but human pilots had learned to fly through worse. They dodged and weaved, losing ships but pressing forward. The first wave crashed through the palace walls and soldiers poured out into the corridors. The palace guards fought with desperate courage. They were the elite of the elite, trained since birth to protect the Emperor. But they had never faced humans in close combat. James and his team moved through the palace like ghosts, using every trick they had learned over 5 years of war. They threw grenades around corners. They hacked security systems. They turned the palace's own defenses against the guards. Nothing was off limits. Nothing was too dirty or dishonorable. Sarah watched from orbit as the space battle reached its climax. The Zarkon home fleet was broken. Ships were fleeing or surrendering. The orbital defenses were offline. The coalition had won, but the cost was terrible. She looked at the casualty reports and felt the weight of every death. 600 ships, 20,000 crew members, 20,000 families who would mourn, 20,000 lives spent to bring down an empire. In the palace throne room, James Okafor finally confronted the Zarkon Emperor. The ancient ruler sat on his throne, surrounded by the last of his guards. He looked old and tired, nothing like the powerful figure from propaganda broadcasts. James offered surrender terms. Stop the war. Release all subject species. Submit to trial for war crimes. The Emperor refused. He would rather die than surrender to primitives. He would rather see his entire empire burn than admit defeat. The final confrontation was brief and brutal. The guards attacked. James's team defended themselves. When the smoke cleared, the guards were dead or wounded. The Emperor sat alone on his throne facing the human captain. James raised his weapon and spoke calmly. He explained that the Emperor had a choice. Surrender now and face justice, or die here and become a martyr. Either way, the war was over. The hegemony was finished. The galaxy had changed. The Emperor looked at James with hatred and something that might have been respect. He had underestimated humanity. They all had. These supposed primitives had destroyed an empire that survived for 50,000 years. They had united the galaxy against his rule. They had proven that age and power meant nothing against determination and adaptability. Slowly, the Emperor raised his hands in surrender. News of the surrender spread across the galaxy within minutes. The Zarkon Empire, the mighty hegemony that had ruled countless worlds, had fallen. The coalition had won. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were suddenly free. The galaxy's power structure collapsed in a single day. Sarah Chen received the report on her bridge and allowed herself one moment of relief. One moment to close her eyes and remember all those who had died to reach this point. 6 billion on Earth in the first attack. Hundreds of thousands more in 5 years of war. So much death, so much sacrifice, but they had won. Against impossible odds, with inferior technology and smaller numbers, humanity and its allies had toppled an ancient empire. They had proven that tyranny could be defeated, that freedom was worth fighting for, that even the youngest species in the galaxy could shape its destiny if they refused to surrender. The Zarkon struck first. They thought they would crush humanity easily. Instead, they awakened something that would change the galaxy forever. They learned too late that humans fight hardest when they have nothing left to lose. The aliens struck first, But humanity's retaliation shook the galaxy. Part 6, 10 years after the Zarkun first strike. Admiral Sarah Chen walked through the rebuilt streets of New Earth City. The name was deliberate. This was not the old Earth trying to pretend the attack never happened. This was New Earth, transformed by war and loss into something different, something stronger. The buildings rose from the ashes of old cities, mixing human and alien architecture. Species from across the galaxy lived here now, working together to build a future none of them could have imagined a decade ago. The war trials had concluded last month. The Zarkun Emperor and his highest commanders faced justice for their crimes, not just against humanity, but against dozens of species they had oppressed for millennia. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring everyone could see that tyranny had consequences. The Emperor was sentenced to life imprisonment. Some wanted execution, but Sarah argued for mercy. Killing him would make him a martyr. Letting him live as a prisoner showed that the coalition was better than the empire it had defeated. The Zarkun species itself was not punished. Most of them had simply followed orders, believing in their leaders and their empire. Now they were learning to live as equals rather than masters. It was a difficult adjustment. Some resisted. Some clung to old beliefs about their superiority. But the young ones, those who grew up after the war, were different. They had Cathara friends. They studied human history. They were building a new identity, one based on cooperation rather than domination. Dr. Marcus Webb had become the head of the Interspecies Scientific Coalition. His dream of unified research spanning multiple species was now reality. Human scientists worked alongside Cathara engineers, Dreth programmers, and Minari doctors. They shared knowledge freely. Medical breakthroughs that would have taken decades now took months. Technology advanced faster than ever. The combination of different perspectives and ideas created innovations none of them could have achieved alone. Captain James Okafor commanded the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, a military organization designed to prevent future wars. It was composed of soldiers from every coalition species, all trained in both combat and diplomacy. Their mission was not conquest but protection. They patrolled trade routes. They mediated disputes. They responded to natural disasters and emergencies. James had gone from teaching humans to fight dirty to teaching all species to avoid fighting at all. Sarah herself had retired from active military service. She now served as humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. The Council was a new institution, formed to replace the old power structures that the hegemony had maintained. Every species had an equal voice. Decisions were made by consensus when possible, majority vote when necessary. It was messy and slow compared to the old imperial decree system, but it was fair. And fairness, Sarah had learned, was worth the inconvenience. The Council's first major decision was about reparations. The former hegemony territories contained vast wealth accumulated over thousands of years. How should it be distributed? Some argued it should all go to humanity, which had suffered the most. Others said it should be divided equally. Sarah proposed something different. Use the wealth to rebuild all the worlds damaged by the war, help species that had been enslaved, develop their own industries and defense forces, ensure that no one would ever again be vulnerable to a predatory empire. The proposal passed unanimously. Reconstruction efforts began immediately. Former hegemony factory worlds became educational centers. Military shipyards were converted to civilian use. Weapon manufacturing facilities started producing tools and machinery for peaceful development. The transformation was slow, but every month brought progress. The galaxy was healing, scarred but alive. War Shepherd Krelvan, the Zarkun commander who had helped end the war, lived in quiet exile on a remote world. He was not imprisoned, but he could never return to his home. His own people considered him a traitor, but he received regular messages from coalition members, thanking him for his courage. Some even visited him, asking him to teach military strategy at the new Interspecies Military Academy. He agreed, finding purpose in helping the next generation understand both the glory and horror of war. Sarah visited him once, 2 years after the war ended. They sat together on a hillside overlooking an alien ocean, two old warriors reflecting on what they had done. Krelvan asked if she regretted the way humanity fought. All the dirty tactics, all the dishonorable methods. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. She said she regretted the necessity of it, but she did not regret doing what was needed to survive. Honor was a luxury that the dead could not afford. Krelvan nodded slowly. He understood now. The humans had not been savage or primitive. They had been pragmatic. They had recognized that survival was more important than reputation. They had done terrible things, yes, but they had done them in service of a greater good. The freedom of billions. The end of tyranny. The birth of a new galactic order based on equality rather than domination. Perhaps, he suggested, that was the highest form of honor. Doing what must be done regardless of cost. On Earth, a massive memorial was completed. It stood where New York once stood, visible from orbit. 6 billion names were inscribed on black stone walls that formed a spiral reaching toward the sky. Every person who died in the first attack was remembered. Visitors walked the spiral path, touching names, remembering the cost of peace. At the center was a simple inscription in every language of the galaxy. We remember, we mourn, we endure. Sarah visited the memorial on the 10th anniversary of the attack. She was older now, her hair gray, her face lined with the marks of a hard decade. She walked slowly along the spiral, reading names. So many lives, so many futures stolen. She thought about the children who never grew up, the parents who never saw their families again, the dreamers who never achieved their dreams, all because an empire decided that human existence was inconvenient. A young Cathara child approached her holding flowers. The child had been born after the war ended, in a galaxy where their species was free. They asked Sarah a question in halting but sincere human language. Were humans always this strong? Sarah knelt down to the child's level and smiled sadly. She explained that humans became strong because they had to be, because someone attacked them and left them no choice but to fight back. But the real strength, she said, was not in fighting. The real strength was in choosing mercy when you had the power to destroy. The child placed the flowers at the base of the memorial and looked up at the endless names. They asked another question. Will there be more wars? Sarah wished she could promise peace forever, but she was too honest for comfortable lies. She said there would always be conflicts. Different species would always have disagreements. But the galaxy had learned an important lesson. War should be the last resort, not the first response. And if war came again, it would be fought by united species defending each other, not empires crushing the weak. That evening, Sarah attended a celebration at the council chambers. It was not celebrating the war but the peace that followed. Representatives from 50 species mingled, sharing food and stories. The Cathara performed traditional songs of freedom. The Dreth demonstrated their latest technological marvels. The Minari offered medical treatments to anyone who needed them. And the humans, the species that had been targeted for extinction just a decade ago, stood among them as equals and friends. Commander Velshara found Sarah in the crowd and embraced her warmly. The Cathara leader had become one of Sarah's closest friends over the years. They had fought together, bled together, survived together. Velshara thanked Sarah again for what humanity had done. Not just for defeating the hegemony, but for showing the galaxy that change was possible, that old systems could be torn down and replaced with something better, that the future did not have to repeat the past. Sarah accepted the thanks with grace but insisted that humanity deserved no special recognition. They had fought for survival, nothing more. It was the species that joined them, that chose to rebel against their oppressors, that truly changed the galaxy. Humanity just lit the spark. Others carried the flame. Together they built something new from the ashes of the old. As the celebration continued into the night, Sarah stepped outside to look at the stars. Somewhere up there, human ships patrolled trade routes alongside vessels from a dozen other species. Somewhere up there, scientists from multiple worlds worked together to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Somewhere up there, children of different species played together, learning that differences were not threats but opportunities. The Zarkun had struck first, believing they could eliminate humanity with overwhelming force. They learned too late that some species cannot be broken, only bent. Humanity's retaliation had indeed shook the galaxy, toppling an ancient empire and reshaping the political landscape of known space. But humanity's mercy, its willingness to build rather than destroy after victory, that changed the galaxy forever, that showed all species that strength without compassion was tyranny, but strength with compassion was true civilization.